On the first day of 1973, Nigerians touched something they had never had before: their own currency. It was the day the Naira was born. This might not sound like a big deal, but think about it for a second. At this point, Nigeria had been independent for 13 years, and Nigerians had spent more than 70 years using currency that wasn't completely theirs. Today, the Naira is everywhere. In my hands are all the denominations of Nigerian currency still in use, from 5 Naira to 1,000 Naira. These are the notes we handle every day. We use them to buy food, pay rent, settle debts, and constantly worry about whether they are enough to survive until the end of the month. This is Nigerian money, ours. Many of us don't think much about it. It's just there, moving from one hand to another, one transaction to the next. But lately, I've been wondering what this money says about us. They say money changes a person. I want to know if it changes a country too. What was Nigeria like before the Naira existed? What changed when it arrived? And how much of the Nigeria we know today was shaped by the way money moves through it? In this video, we're going to follow the story of money in Nigeria, from the currencies that came before the Naira to the role it has played in shaping the country we live in today. Before these notes existed, Nigerians used pounds, the currency of their British colonizers. Before that, they traded with cowries, manillas, metal rods, clothes, and other locally recognized forms of value as mediums of exchange, alongside barter and credit arrangements grounded in trust and social relationships. These systems were flexible and varied by region, but they were also fully functional, supporting both local markets and long-distance trade. But during the period of British colonial expansion in West Africa, control over what counted as money shifted hands. In 1902, the colonial administration introduced a law known as the Native Currency Proclamation. This law removed the legal status of many existing forms of money across the region, meaning they could no longer be used officially to buy and sell. In their place, people were required to use the colonial pound, a currency controlled by the British authorities. A system of many local currencies tied to different communities and economies were replaced by a single system imposed from outside. This is where the modern history of money in Nigeria begins. The people in British West Africa, which consisted of Nigeria, the Gold Coast, now Ghana, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia, traded with pounds, which was the standard British currency. But this created a problem. Because Britain and its African colonies were spending the same currency, coins issued in the colonies always found their way back into Britain, which then created a shortage of coins in the colonies. To address this, the British colonial authorities created the West African Currency Board in 1912. The board was headquartered in the British capital and was given a mandate to issue currency for the West African colonies. The currency issued by the board was the British West African pound, which was designed to be identical to the British pound sterling. 20 shillings made up 1 pound, and each shilling was divided into 12 pence. The coins were distinctive and had holes in their centers, a design choice intended to prevent them from circulating outside West Africa and drifting back to Britain. This system was efficient, but it also tied West Africa's economy directly to Britain's economy. Every note and coin issued in West Africa was required to be backed 100% by sterling reserves held in Britain. In practical terms, West Africa could not create money independently. So if the region had, say, £1 million worth of its own currency circulating, there had to be £1 million sitting in London to back it. The result was a system where local economic activity depended on financial capacity controlled outside its region. The money that circulated through Nigerian markets and paid Nigerian wages answered to a board of administrators in England. From 1912 to 1950, the West African Currency Board distributed approximately £8.7 million in profits to the 4 colonies, with Nigeria receiving the largest share, £4.5 million, or around 52% because it had the largest population and economy. So for over 40 years, people across the region, from farmers and factory workers to traders and civil servants, depended on colonial currency for everyday transactions. For a minute, I want to take a deeper look at what this reality meant for people using a currency directly tied to the British pounds back then. The money in this period functioned as what economists called a store of value. People could save money and reasonably expect it to hold its worth over time. That stability was not accidental. After the Second World War, much of the global economy was rebuilt around a system designed to prevent the kind of instability that had marked the interwar years of 1918 and 1939. During that period, sharp currency collapses, trade breakdowns, and economic crises contributed to global political instability. This became the Bretton Woods system, where major currencies were anchored to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was tied to gold to ensure stable exchange rates, controlled inflation, and a more orderly global trading system. The British pound was one of the system's anchor currencies, and the West African pound benefited by association. Because each layer of this arrangement was relatively fixed, the currency used in everyday life did not fluctuate dramatically. Prices were more stable, and saving over time was possible without constant uncertainty about value. Okay, so it is the late 1950s, and African colonies are gaining independence at a rapid pace. Nigeria also yearns for this independence. And one of the clearest expressions of this shift was money. Newly independent countries wanted control over their own currency. Political independence signals self-determination, control over land, laws, and destiny. Money sits at the center of that idea. It shapes what is valued, what is possible, and who holds power in an economy. As self-government approached, there was growing recognition that the monetary system that existed would not be sustainable for a sovereign state. How would a future independent Nigeria manage its economy? In 1958, 2 years before independence, the Central Bank of Nigeria was established after a series of policy discussions. It marked a shift from a system where monetary authority sat entirely outside the country to one where key financial decisions were beginning to be managed from within. In 1959, the Nigerian pound was issued for the first time. A national currency had arrived. The banknotes now carried a Nigerian identity, and the authority to issue them had shifted from London to Lagos. This mattered in a newly independent country. Money is part of how a nation presents itself, alongside its flag and anthem. Yet, in most ways that mattered, the Nigerian pound was not very different from the British West African pound it replaced. It remained at parity with sterling. 1 Nigerian pound equaled 1 British pound. It remained fully convertible, which means its value was still anchored to Britain's currency system. The pounds, shillings, and pence system remained intact. It would take another decade and a half before this system changes. I want to pause here for a bit and take you on a detour to a currency that existed for a short while. A few years after independence from Britain, Nigeria experienced military unrest, which eventually led to the secession of Biafra and civil war in 1967. During the war, the breakaway state introduced its own currency, the Biafran pound. It circulated as official currency within the territory controlled by the secessionist government from 1968 until the end of the war. The Biafran pound had its own notes and coins and was issued by the Bank of Biafra. It kept at parity with the Nigerian pound, meaning 1 Biafran pound was treated as equal in value to 1 Nigerian pound, functioning as parallel currency during the political split. It was used to pay soldiers, run the government, and sustain everyday trade inside Biafra during the war economy. But this currency operated in an isolated financial environment. It had no external backing or global recognition. It could not circulate beyond Biafra or be exchanged outside its territory. Its value was not anchored to an international monetary system, but in the authority of a wartime government trying to keep economic life functioning under siege. After the war in 1970, the federal government faced the challenge of rebuilding destroyed infrastructure, national unity, and a shared sense of identity in a country that had experienced total division, including through money. That experience shaped the decision to introduce the Naira 3 years later. Let me interrupt your flow for a minute. 3 years ago, we started putting old Nigerian newspapers and magazines online. Since then, thousands of forgotten pages have become discoverable again. Some of those discoveries tell us a lot about Nigeria's social, economic, and political history. Others are deeply personal. A CEO can read through newspaper articles about his dad in the 90s and 2000s. Two women find photographs their grandfather took in 1979, and another woman finds an image of her mother modeling at a hairdressing competition in 1978. What makes those moments possible is simple. Somewhere in Nigeria, there are old newspapers and magazines that no one thinks had value anymore. In many cases, these are the only surviving records of events that mattered to thousands of people. The challenge here is that these papers don't last forever. Papers fade, collections deteriorate, and entire archives disappear. Every year, parts of Nigeria's documented history becomes harder to recover. So we go looking for them. We rescue materials. We scan page after page and make them searchable so that anyone, anywhere can find them again. And once those pages come online, they start living new lives. A single page can connect a person to a parent, a community to its past, or a country to a piece of itself it almost lost. That's why membership matters. Every page we save becomes possible because people like you decide that our work was worth supporting. We've already preserved hundreds of thousands of pages. There are hundreds of thousands more waiting. If you'd like to help save them, fund our work. On January 1st, 1973, under the military regime of Yakubu Gowon, Nigeria officially replaced pounds, shillings, and pen system with the Naira and Kobo. The name Naira was coined by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, then Federal Commissioner of Finance, by shortening the name Nigeria. Its subunit, the Kobo, came from copper, the metal used in early coins. The names were deliberate acts of linguistic decolonization. A new decimal structure was also introduced, and it made conversion mathematically clean. 2 naira for every 1 pound, meaning 1 naira was equivalent to 10 shillings and 100 kobo made 1 naira. The old currency was redrawn over a transition period, with both systems briefly circulating side by side to allow adjustment. This structure made pricing, accounting, and taxation mathematically simpler and easier to standardize across the country. The Decimal Currency Committee had recommended the change as early as 1964, but the political instability through the mid-1960s and the Civil War postponed implementation for nearly a decade. For the first time, the everyday act of spending money no longer carried the weight of a colonial system. But the introduction of the Naira happened at a very specific moment. Nigeria had joined the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries in 1971 and was riding the early surges of the oil boom. The global oil price shock of 1973, triggered by the Arab-Israeli War, sent oil revenues soaring for producing nations. Nigeria was suddenly rich with petrodollars. The Naira launched into this period of confidence, which strengthened trust in it both locally and internationally. That strength, however, also began to shift how the economy functioned. While the Naira succeeded in replacing the colonial monetary system and the fragmented wartime legacy of multiple currencies, it also became part of a larger economic shift that would reshape how Nigerians experienced money itself. Nigeria's oil earnings peaked at roughly $22.4 billion in 1980. The government built federal ministries, expanded the military, launched Operation Feed the Nation, and constructed new universities. Infrastructure projects multiplied. A new capital was commissioned to be built from the ground up in Abuja. The country felt genuinely like a rising power. But the oil boom planted what economists called the Dutch disease, named after the Netherlands experience after a major natural gas discovery in the 1960s, to describe what happens when a booming natural resource sector draws investment away from other parts of the economy. In Nigeria's case, rising oil revenues strengthened the Naira and made non-oil exports like agriculture less competitive in global markets. Over time, farming for exports declined sharply, and agriculture's role in the economy shrank as oil became dominant. A country that had once depended heavily on its farm increasingly relied on imports for food and basic goods. By the early 1980s, that oil-driven system was already under strain. When global oil prices fell, it revealed how fragile the new economic structure had become. If 1973 was the year Nigeria launched its currency with pride, the mid-1980s marked the moment that confidence, began to unravel. By 1985, Nigeria's economy was in crisis. Foreign reserves were low, the Naira was overvalued, and import-dependent sectors were struggling to access foreign exchange. The government declared an economic state of emergency and faced a choice between an IMF-backed adjustment program or a locally designed version of similar reforms. In 1986, the Structural Adjustment Program was introduced. Its central feature was the devaluation of the Naira, allowing it to find its market value through a new foreign exchange system. The adjustment was immediate. The exchange rate moved from roughly 1 naira per dollar in 1985 to 2.02 naira by 1986, 8 naira by 1989, and continued falling through the 1990s as Nigeria shifted away from a fixed economic rate system. Imported goods, food, and medicine became significantly more expensive. Inflation rose sharply, and the subsidies that had made fuel, education, and healthcare affordable to ordinary Nigerians were cut. The money that had the previous year bought a bag of rice now bought half a bag, if you could find one. SAP also triggered a wider political response. Labor unions, students, and professional groups mobilized against the reforms. This period fed into the broader pro-democracy movement of the 1990s. Economic pressure and political agitation began to reinforce each other. By 2024, the Naira had lost over 99% of its value against the dollar, compared to its 1973 launch rate. 1 naira, worth roughly 66 US cents at introduction, had become worth only a fraction of a cent. Under the pound system, value felt relatively stable. People could save and plan because the currency was expected to hold its weight. The Naira, for much of its 50-year history, has increasingly become a medium of exchange rather than a store of value. It's what we call a hot potato, something you earn and try to spend quickly, convert to dollar, or invest in something physical like land, livestock, cement, because holding it means watching it lose value while you sleep. This shift affects behavior and the way Nigerians think about money. While the Naira remains the currency Nigerians earn and spend, it has become less reliable as a way to measure value. For many high-volume business transactions, prices are increasingly being referenced in dollars. People judge what they have not by its Naira amount, but by what it could be converted into. The physical structure of the currency reflects this shift. Higher denominations were introduced as the Naira lost purchasing power over time. Smaller denominations became impractical for daily transactions, making higher value notes more convenient and portable. It is why you no longer see Nigerians spend coins, even though they are technically still legal tender in the country. The conflict between national pride and the Naira's weakening purchasing power is one of the central tensions of modern Nigerian economic life. When you hold 1,000 Naira notes today and consider what it can buy, you are doing more than a transaction. You are seeing the distance between what the currency represents and what it delivers. You are holding in paper form the accumulated weight of every economic choice Nigeria has made and failed to make since independence. Money is, at its core, a social contract. It works only when people trust the institutions behind it. Trust that tomorrow a note will be worth roughly what it is today, that the agreement will be honored. The story of Nigeria's currency is, in part, the story of how much that trust has been built, tested, and how much it has weakened. But the story is not finished. The Naira still exists, and the choices that will determine what the next 50 years will look like are still being made.